Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the 107 podcast with myself, Jacob, and my co-host, Ash. Today, we're joined by a very special guest, an actual race driver, somebody who's actually paid to go out on track and be the fastest person known to man. We are, of course, joined by Olli Caldwell, who is currently a Alpine Academy driver. Is that technically the correct way to
Yes, thanks for having me on, first of all. And yeah, I'm part of the Alpine Academy team, sort of a graduate on from that. Part of the Alpine family, I guess you could say.
Yeah, again, much better put than I ever would have put it. And so obviously this is a Formula One based podcast. Some of our fans will have obviously be watching during your time in F2 and F3. But do you want to explain a little bit about your, like, who you are, your racing background, like maybe even how you got into racing in the first place?
Yes, so my name is Oliver Caldwell. I'm 21 at the time of recording this. And yeah, I'm a professional racing driver. This year, 2024, competing in the European Le Mans Series with the reigning champions Algarve Pro Racing, part of the Alpine family, as I mentioned. And my racing history and experiences started, like a lot of people, in go-karts. A bit later on, I would say, than most. I started when I was 10 years old in go-karts. Did that until I was 16, did European Championships, and then graduated to cars. Did the standard sort of single-seater route, so Formula 4, then up to Formula Regional, Formula 3, Formula 2 was the peak of that, and then I did some F1 testing as well with Alpine. So yeah, that's sort of my history in racing, quite expansive, but yeah, still getting started.
Yeah, like you say, only 21 years of age, so you've still got years and years, especially if we look at somebody like Fernando Alonso. You've got years ahead of you. For racing. But one of the things obviously you're going to be doing this year, we'll start off with that, is you're going to be cycling a absolutely ridiculous journey, aren't you? So for those of you who don't know, Ollie is going to be cycling all the way from Silverstone all the way to Monza with a couple of pit stops. I'll let you introduce the full route and sell it a lot better than I will, but it is a ridiculous distance of like 1,500 kilometers there or thereabouts. Insane.
Yeah, so this is a challenge that I've tasked myself. I sort of imagined it in the off season of racing. Naturally, I was very bored. So I was sort of thinking of, unique ways to just challenge myself in a different way after getting bored in the gym for a couple of weeks. So yeah, I came up with this challenge. It's titled Mindful Miles, cycling for charity or racing for charity. And it's a cycle trip, like you say, starting in the UK at Silverstone racetrack, and then cycling all the way to the Monza racetrack, and that'll be the end point in Italy. A distance of 1,700 kilometers roughly. And we're going to go through some pit stops at Spa on the way, and the Nürburgring Nordschleife as well on the way, to sort of add some breaks into the journey and, revisit these historic tracks off driving them, which is the way I usually do it. So yeah, it's going to take a while, but super looking forward to it, for a good cause as well. Something very different.
Yeah, absolutely. Off the back of that, how long are you expecting this journey to take?
I'm expecting it to take anywhere between 16 and 20 days. I don't really want to put a rush on it because you never know what can happen. But yeah, it can't last any longer than 22 days, basically, is the time that I've allowed. And in the middle of it, I will actually have to fly to Portugal to see the team for a event that I can't miss. So that will add a bit of pressure because I got to fly there, fly back.
A little bit, yeah.
But yeah, that's part of it. That's part of, the whole thing, and I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. And what made you decide to support Mind?
So I went with a mental health charity. So May is Mental Health Awareness Month, as some people may know. So I went with Mind, a UK-based mental health charity. And the reason I went with mental health was because, the the sports industry in general, not just racing, of course, but that's what my experience is in, is so high pressured, is so tough on mental well-being, with all the traveling, the time away, not really seeing friends and family a lot. It's high pressured, and I wanted to try and bring some awareness to it. I know there's discussions in the industry about it, but I don't think it's got to the point where it's openly serious yet. So I think, this might be a great way to start that conversation, and hopefully, bring others along for it.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, what do drivers, engineers, people who travel really experience? Like you said, you're away from your friends and family. What would you like to see happen in the sport now that more of a light's coming onto it and you're doing this? And can you also talk a little bit around like social media as well? Like that's a huge burden on especially young people and mental health. And I guess you're in a position where you have to have it, I guess, for your role. But you look at someone who has a bad race weekend, or someone like Lance Stroll, unfortunately, just the hate that just gets thrown at him. And like, I didn't really understand it until we had someone, just like random people, on some of the stuff that we've done. I was like, this is just a small iteration of what happens to people like yourself, I guess.
Yeah. So for the first part of that question, there's obviously, I'll go with the F1 calendar, 24 races, which is already a lot in a 52-week year. It's already like nearly half the year gone. But what people don't see outside of that is the extra travel that goes in for that, adds a couple more weeks to that and just traveling. Sometimes you won't go home if it's back-to-backs, or if there's only a week off in between and the time difference is large. No one would go home because it makes no sense to. Days to go to the factory, to go in simulator, especially if you're racing and your team is based where you're not living, it's just extra days. So when I did F2, it was 14 events. So for every 14 events, I would go to Spain, where my team is based, for a week for each event. So just double that, basically. It's already 28. And they're sort of the numbers that you're working with. Plus then the travel, you can make it 31 weeks. And there's just no downtime. It's just so high pressured. There's no time. Even when you're home, you have to be thinking about the next event, because you have to be preparing for it already with such little track time. So many things to go over from the last event to then bring forwards into the new event, trying to fit in training into that. A lot of drivers actually would become less generally fit during the season because there's just no time to go to the gym. But they'll be really car fit because that's what they're doing. But their general strength, cardio might decrease. And then, you never see, most of your friends are from the racetrack, which is weird because you can be competing against someone, but they have to kind of be your friend in a way because you don't spend any time with anyone else. So I think a lot of drivers recently have managed to do that quite well. On the track, you can be competitive and, it's just you, and then you can separate it from outside. And I think it's very different to the past. I saw an article recently. I can't remember who it was from. It was from like a 80s, 90s driver. And he said that never happened in his time. And it was just a lot less racing then, and you could bring your family along, and drivers now and teams don't really like that sometimes. So it's very isolating. And I know it's very tough on drivers, of course, doing it myself. Then the drivers, physios, they don't see their families. And then that goes for the whole race team, the engineers, the mechanics. You're missing out on their family, their friends. So I think where the sport is right now, it's really taxing on everyone. And that's only happened in the last few years. So I think there'll be a big change, because I think you'll start to see people start to fail with it. Just from what I've heard and spoken with people, not a lot of people are happy just from inside the sport. And I think you'll see it start to change.
I think part of the problem, potentially anyway, this is me completely outside of the paddock, zero idea, but as an expert, But I think part of the problem is that, for example, if it was like it was with safety within sport back however long ago, 20, 30 years ago, a big crash would change things. Whereas with something as not invisible, but invisible as mental health, there isn't really something which is like, oh, this was the event that made everything or made everyone think again. And so that, I think, is probably one of the biggest issues around something like mental health in the sport and in general, of course, is that you can't physically see it, really.
Yeah.
Obviously, you can see signs of it, etc., but it's not something like a broken arm or a car crash or whatever it is. Which, must be really, really difficult. I think both myself and Ash have said already, like, the calendar just needs to be shorter. It's outrageous that it's even above 21. 21 is asking a lot, let alone 24, with sprint races on top of that as well. It's for Formula One anyway, it definitely is a lot for sure. But so to go back a teeny tiny bit as well, you're obviously going to be creating like a documentary. You've got a filmmaking friend joining you for the journey, which sounds really awesome. Looking forward to seeing that as well. We'll obviously share that on our socials and stuff like that as well. But could you talk a little bit about why you decided to do that as well? Because that's something that I don't think a lot of people would think to do as well.
Yeah, so basically, when I thought of it, I was like, well, I can't do it alone. That would be
fair enough, yeah,
pretty intense. So I was like, well, who do I know who would be crazy enough to do something like this? And it was a friend completely unrelated to racing that I thought of, who'd done some similar trips across India and things, doing crazy stuff. So I called him, and like you mentioned, he is a filmmaker. So then he came up with the idea. He was like, yeah, I'd love to join. Why don't we make a documentary of it? Which was something that I hadn't thought of. And I was like, yeah, that's an awesome idea. And it will just bring such a behind the scenes insight, I hope, to what we're going to go through on these 21 days. And obviously we're going to speak about it deliberately on the trip. But I think what we're going to learn on the trip is actually how, just by opening up and maybe talking to each other while the camera is going to be filming, but just talking to each other, it actually brings the conversation a lot more to light, and you'll see it a lot more like that, where, everyone at the moment is, I feel, kind of on the edge of talking about it. Like, it's getting bigger, mental health awareness, but when you cross the bridge, it like this conversation now is, it opens up a lot freely, and you realize that everyone has these issues, whether they're normal people or professional athletes. Everyone's going through something, and I think by doing this, it's just another way to help bring it to light, like I say, and hopefully get other people in the industry or other professional athletes talking about it a bit more.
Fingers crossed they do. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Ash, you look like you were gonna.
Yeah, I just think, just going back to what you said earlier, I think Formula One is glamorized. They're like, oh, we're in Monaco and we're in Brazil and we're here racing fast cars, but it's not, like you said, what it is behind the scenes, which is like, I've been on a flight to New York and I was 6 hours. I hated it. It was cramped. It's like, and I had to turn it around in 3 days. Like, this sucks, right? But I just wanted to go back to just what would you like to see happen more in the sport? Do you think sports psychologists should be mandatory for each team? And just to touch back on the social media question, because that's, like I said, it's expanded people's awareness of mental health, but it's also contributed a lot to people's mental health as well.
Yeah, I think so. On the social media side, the sport's exploded in recent years, which is really good, really good for the sport. You've got people now watching Formula 2, Formula 3, obviously Formula 1 way more, whereas before, people watch them, but it wasn't, as well known. Whereas now Formula 2 has well in the millions of followers on Instagram. If you've heard of F1, you've probably heard of F2. Even if you haven't watched it, it's there. So for the whole sport in general and the whole racing industry, I think just from Formula 1 blowing up, WEC, ELMS, everything's got bigger. But from that social media increase, following has increased, which is good and bad, because there's a lot of hate that comes with that. You can be the best drivers in the world, Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso. There's always people commenting bad things, because it's so easy to do. And I think, I think there's been studies on this. I'm not a professional, so anyone listening can do a bit more research into it. But I've seen studies where the human brain reacts a lot stronger to negative comments than positive ones. So one negative comment like cancels out 10 positive ones. And I have quite a low following compared to, I think I'm near 40,000, and there are some F2 drivers now with 500,000 or 200,000, whatever. And, I was getting death threats randomly.
Jesus.
Of just for no reason that I could see, was getting like random death threats, hateful comments, all stuff like that, just for no reason. And it just makes you feel terrible, like receiving these things, and you start questioning yourself, and you're like, why am I doing this? What if I'm not actually good? Some bad results, and then people start questioning you as well. So it's a big spiral. And like you say, it only gets worse. The more successful you get, the worse it gets for that. And I think you mentioned earlier that, while mental health is invisible, you can see signs. I think you can see signs in a few drivers in F1 at the moment quite clearly that, it's going pretty intense on social media for them and in general. And I think something has to be done about that for sure. I don't know why people have such a bad opinion. You can have your opinion, but to send some stuff is quite intense. And I think you mentioned about a sports psychologist in the industry for every team. I think making it mandatory would not be the right idea, because it has to be wanted in the industry. It has to come from a place of, you're like, okay, I want to work with a sports psychologist to improve myself. If it's forced, it just never works. So I think teams have to start having that approach. I know drivers individually do it. I do it myself. I work with a sports psychologist. And I know a few other drivers that do as well, but it's not just the drivers who are suffering. It is the coaches, the mechanics, the engineers. So it'd be great, I think, if teams could look into that. And I'm sure some are already.
Yeah.
Kind of like therapy. No, so I was just saying, like, having access to, like you said, mind, having access to that for like the entire staff, and investing in them. Say, like, you might want to speak to me or your manager or a colleague or a friend, like, you don't know who to talk to. Sometimes having that stranger, if that makes sense, who doesn't know you, so won't judge you, might be like a good starting point into just telling people how you feel.
Exactly. It just opens up that dialogue, and something might be on your mind that you can't think of a way out of it, sort of thing. And then just by speaking to either a friend or a random person in the team, they can give you an opinion or an idea that you had never thought of yourself, and suddenly you're free of that weight on your shoulders, sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's also one of those things where, like, what's easier to do, win like a Grand Prix, F2, F3, F1, whatever, incredibly hard, by the way, or just take the piss out of somebody online, like I think there's probably one which is a little bit easier. It's one of those things as well. It's just that low-hanging fruit, and it's never nice at all. And I guess also it must be, again, this is maybe a little bit of an assumption, but I guess also it must be very strange as well, because some of the criticism that maybe yourself but other drivers will also have is based on their driving performances, but probably as soon as that helmet goes on, that's your escape, because you can't, well, you've got team radio, but you're so focused and like laser focused on the task ahead of you, making sure that you don't bin it going into turn one, your tires are at temp, everything, and it's like your safe space almost, but not really. That must be a really weird line to walk as well, right? Or am I completely off base?
Yeah, I guess it's right. Once you put the race helmet on and get in the car, then you are in the zone, let's call it. Everything, all your friends who are on the track with you are no longer your friends. And stuff like that. But if you have these nagging things in the back of your head, it doesn't help. And there should be a way to clear those things and just be solely focused on on the job at hand. And I think working with professionals can do that, definitely.
Can we talk about racing?
Yeah.
So, okay, now that we kind of like segued into it. Before we actually go into more of the racing, one of the few things I think is a little bit disappointing is like personalization in racing, right? It's like the car, it's the sponsors and all that, but the helmet's where you can have a little bit of fun. What does your helmet mean to you? I see you've got the purple and all that. It's like, does it just, is that like, it just looks cool?
Really right. It's genuinely really
it's
nice
genuinely quite
well,
cool.
Yeah.
And I know it's like you obviously got to work with the sponsors and the team colors, but like, what does your helmet mean to you?
It's it's like you said, it's the only bit of personalization you can really do, unless you really work closely with the team. But a lot of them have contract deals with their own sponsors, and it's a bit more difficult. So the helmet is, it's such an important part of it, and it's like your design. You can really go with whatever you want to a limit. And yeah, I love my design at the moment. It's a fresh design last year. I had stayed with the same one very early since karting, all the way until Formula 2. And I love the design. It always stood out very well. It had like a power button on the side. So I felt like every time I was putting it on, it was like getting into the zone, turning on the zone, that sort of thing.
Nice.
And then when I finished Formula 2, I sort of retired that design because it was a chapter of my racing career over. And I wanted, as I moved into sports car racing, to start fresh. So I worked with a designer, a guy called Miles Murphy. He designs a lot of the Formula 1 guys' helmets, does mine, MTM designs. I've worked with him since karting, and I was like, Miles, I need something new. New logo, sent that over to him. I was like, my favorite color is purple.
I like the logo. The logo is cool. When it came up on your website, I was like, that's cool.
Yeah, it sort of curves around the helmet as well, like OC. I was like Alpine blue, working with Alpine, English lines in there, and then the London skyline just for being British. And I was like, what can we do with this? And Miles literally got it in one.
Nice.
Smashed it, got some chrome glitter on there, and it just looks like I'm in love with it. And I've had a lot of compliments on it as well, which is really nice.
That's cool. So is there a particular race that you're proud of, or like just a favorite moment, or something that's like this just meant more?
I've done a few cool races like I can think of that have meant a lot to me. Maybe not in terms of results were that great, but just like really proud of myself for what I did. I'd say like one that straight away comes to mind was my first F3 win in Barcelona. That was a tough race. I think I started in 7th, and then you got up into the podium spots, and then there were a couple crashes which I avoided, and just was a tough race, but just like staying in my zone, like managed to come through and win that. So that was awesome. And then like I raced in GTs in the Golf 12 Hours back in 2018. First ever time driving a GT car, and won a 12-hour race. So I was pretty impressed with how I did there. Something completely new, just was having a bit of fun, and had some great teammates and won that. But the most recent one was probably my start to this year. It was a difficult winter for me. Last year wasn't a great season, so I was struggling from that, transitioning away from Formula 2, giving up sort of the Formula 1 dream. It was a tough year. So I worked really hard on myself over the winter to reset, refresh myself, focus on, what I had to improve, focus on what was important, and then go straight out the blocks this year at Barcelona and finish second. It was a great start to the season in a really competitive grid. I was very happy with the way that I drove in my part of the race. I took the car from 4th to 1st before I gave it to my teammate. And I was super happy that I could see all of the hard work I'd done over the last 6 months have come to fruition. And can't wait to carry that forwards as well.
You mentioned some great tracks there as well. Is there a particular track that you're like, yes, this is what I'm here for? I love this track.
Yeah, I mean, the iconic ones. I'll say my my top 3 favorite are the insane ones. So Macau is
nice.
crazy. That was such a cool race that I did. Zooming about there in an F3 car, 285 kilometers an hour on a street track. The walls super close. Bathurst, I drove in a GT3 car, so the roller coaster in Australia. That was crazy. First ever time in a GT3 car. First ever time in Bathurst.
Ridiculous.
I threw myself in at the deep end, and that was super cool. And then Le Mans, which I did last year, was also insane. Over 300,000 people, 24-hour race, driving around at 2 a.m. with barbecues, fireworks, drones were flying about, just the track itself. Awesome. They're my top 3, and they're all pretty unique.
Yeah, and those are really different tracks as well for various different reasons as well. That's absolutely insane. I was actually going to ask a little bit about obviously the more endurance style racing compared to Formula, I guess. You must have to set yourself up so differently as well. Could you talk a little bit about your approach compared to like Formula, where you might be only driving for like an hour max-ish, maybe an hour and a half, I don't know, safety cars, compared to like 4-hour stints, I guess? Is it 4-hour stints at Le Mans?
At Le Mans, it can be between 3 and 4 hours, So in Formula 2, the feature race is 1 hour long, with a pit stop in there. So I'll base it on that, as that's really the closest. Everything below that is 35 or 40 minutes, which really is a sprint. There is no, F3 and below you're just racing 100% to the flag. Formula 2 with an hour and a pit stop, you start to get, and 2 different tyre compounds I'll add in, you start to get a bit more of a strategy game, but, it's still a sprint in a way. The tyres last quite well in Formula 2. You do the softer compound, the option compound, where you might push really hard and just make sure you don't lock up. Then you go on to the harder compound, and it's just the same thing. You're just driving around as fast as you can while not locking up, not wheel spinning. It's still quite a sprinty race. Whereas in the endurance side, in European Le Mans series, I'm driving for an hour and a half. And like you mentioned, at Le Mans, I'll do between 2, 3, 4 hours at a time, which is insane, like way longer. And because the races are so long, it's it's a marathon, not a sprint. So there's a lot more focus on, strategy from outside of the car on the engineers. You can also play with it in the car, fuel saving, making sure there's no contact at all, no damage. Because while you might have a tiny bit of contact with the car, a bit of rubbing, it might cost you a tenth a lap, which in a sprint, not too bad. Over 24 hours and over 400 laps, it adds up.
Yeah.
So it's a completely different ball game. Your mental focus has to be a lot stronger because you're focusing for a lot longer. Whereas the physical aspect of it, because you might be driving at 90% rather than in F2 and F1, 97%, it's a bit less physical. It sort of transitions you from these short, high intense sessions to doing longer cardio sessions in the gym, or longer gym sessions, for example, and a lot more focus on building up your mental resistance to be able to focus for such a long period of time as well.
Is there a difference between racing during the day and racing during the night?
In terms of, I did a few night races in F2, and I've done some night races in endurance as well. If it's like a sprint, no, there's not really any difference, especially on the Formula 1 tracks. They're so well lit, it's actually like daytime. But in Le Mans or in 24-hour races, for example, driving in the night is quite tiring, with no sleep. So at that point, and where it's so dark, you really have to be, it's a different type of focus just for, trying to be so consistent. You have to focus a lot on, before you even get in the car, the food you're eating, to just keep up your energy levels throughout these night stints when your body wants to be asleep. hydration, all things like this can make or break you in the night. If you haven't done any of those things well, your body's just going to want to sleep. Whereas if you kind of pre-prepared for it, you might get in feeling tired, but your mind will be fueled and it will just switch back on, and suddenly you're driving just in the dark.
We actually we had a conversation a couple of months ago with a performance coach called Ash Buckman, and he was talking about even just simply, for example, if you go from being at base, let's say in the UK, or obviously you mentioned in Spain at your previous team, to then going to, like, for example, Australia, even just something as simple as getting like a time difference correct can just drain you and set you up either really well, or really horribly. Clearly, I need to sleep better. But yeah, no, it can literally make a huge difference. So it doesn't surprise me that, like, although, you know, for example, F2 is probably not too bad, that just, to set your body up must be just a completely different ball game. But a slightly silly question. We've obviously had a couple of different drivers talk about like obviously having to consume so much food and water and stuff like that during the races. Have you ever had to pee in your seat?
No, I have not had to pee in my seat,
okay,
thankfully.
Nice. That's
Thank
good.
you. Has anyone said yes to that yet?
I'll be honest, you're the first racing driver we've spoken to, so
okay.
I don't even know whether or not that's bad to even ask, but...
Yeah, no, because I think I know one driver who's done it.
You don't have to name names, that's fine.
No, I won't.
Maybe after. Yeah, no, it's fine. But yeah, I guess that one to segue nicely into this, one seat you wouldn't want to pee in is the Alpine 21 car, which you managed to, very lucky man, to have driven that. That must have been absolutely ridiculous. Get the opportunity to do some testing and some laps in that. Where did you do those testing laps? Because I did some research, obviously, but I can't remember where you did that.
I did a day in Silverstone and a day in Bahrain.
Nice, yeah.
So 2 really cool tracks.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, an awesome experience. I nearly did pee in the sea from excitement the first time. Two awesome experiences. A lot of laps done, a lot of mileage complete. They were full scale testing days, not like filming days or anything like that. So to get some proper running in the Formula One car was awesome. Silverstone was my first experience, and that was being thrown in at the deep end. Just because a lot of the difference from the Formula One to the Formula Two is in the high speed. Where there's low speed, minimum speeds and everything are very similar. The high speed is a completely different world. So Silverstone, a very high speed track, Maggots and Beckett's, that whole complex. Yeah, I was blown away, and it took me a few laps to get used to it, and then did a second day at Bahrain where I was way more confident, knew what to expect, and then did some really good testing in Bahrain. It was awesome that Alpine gave me the opportunity to do those days. I learned a lot. We did a lot of benchmarking as well for them, so got some good running for them in. And just awesome to be involved in and driving a Formula One car. And I think one of the best ever Formula One cars that have existed, that 2020, 2021 season when the cars were at their God tier.
Pretty much, yeah.
And that car did win a race. That is a race winning car and an awesome experience that I'll never forget. Never. I wish we could do it again. Every day.
I bet. Yeah.
Every day.
Your neck probably wouldn't thank you for that, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't mind. I'll still do it every day. I'll deal with that.
Yeah, I've heard of worse problems to have.
Yeah.
I think it would be also like maybe you could speak a little bit about it as well, going obviously to testing even in Bahrain. Do you think it would be nice to potentially see maybe even a new rule introduced where obviously there are 3 days of testing for F1 before a new season, maybe even having a mandatory reserve driver drive during maybe not even a whole day, but one of the AM or PM sessions, or maybe even an extra session added on for the reserve driver to get a go?
Yeah, I think obviously there used to be a bit more testing. it's been limited for budget reasons, which I can understand for the smaller teams. And working within the Formula One teams, while I would be in that position, I would love to just say, yeah, they should definitely just add a rookie day at the beginning of the season, as well as the FP1s and everything, just to get them driving. I can see from the team's perspective, it's already limited testing. They need the race drivers in, especially at the beginning of the season, to get this car to the race winning potential, championship potential that they want it to be in. Which is usually why the rookies drive the FP1s near the end of the year, is because it's fully away. The focus is on next year already. That tends to be why. So maybe I think a way kind of around it to make everyone happy would be to add more mandatory FP1 sessions for rookies.
Nice.
You could add a couple more of those in without really taking away from the work that the team's doing. But yeah, as a rookie or as someone who would be in that position, I'd love to say that'd be awesome, which it would be. But yeah, there's the political behind the scenes of it, which is why I think it isn't a thing yet. They obviously did used to do the mid-season tests, which I think they could bring back at least a day or two. But the season is already so flat out, as we spoke about earlier, that I just don't think there's time anymore to do it.
What would you say splits a good driver from a great run, right? I think, everyone's like, oh yeah, I'm a good driver, and they drive around on the streets and maybe do the odd track day. But those kind of people.
I feel like this is a personal attack, but go on.
Someone puts giant wings on their Subaru and stuff like that and thinks they're a race car driver.
Which one of us has done a lap at Nürburgring? Which one?
Yeah.
Which one?
But like,
what
separates like someone who could go around the Nürburgring to someone like yourself? Like, how do you control the car with no traction, stop it from locking up? And there's a dip. You see some of those videos where like Lando Norris will go against some complete rookie, and he's like, I can give you a 30-second head start and still catch you. But you're like, where is that time coming from? Like, where do you find that?
I think, well, it's just experience in the end. It's a lot of experience of driving different types of cars in different conditions from a young age, where you learn so much more quickly. That's definitely the main part of it. I would say, like, just being able to understand very quickly, like, a car's limits, like its longitudinal limits, its lateral limits, the tire limits, the slip angle on the wheel. There's a lot of things that you don't think about. Even like, I'm struggling to think about it now. But in the moment, I know exactly what's happening. With how the tire's behaving, even small things such as how you can feel through the wheel when you know what you're looking for. You can feel how the wheel is moving on the rim of the tire, which is a big thing in Formula 2, and Formula 1, where the new rims are so big, the tire moves, and it can give you a feeling of oversteering the car, but it's actually just the wheel moving on and curving over the rim. But it all just comes with experience. I'd say with, like anything, if you play the piano for the first time versus someone who's been doing it for 10 years, they won't be thinking of what their fingers are doing, and you'll be looking at each key you're pressing. But yeah, usually the main ones are like just understanding how much potential a car has in braking, how to, where the slip angle on the tire is, so you're not just turning the wheel for no reason. And then how much power the rear tires can take without spinning out, and stuff like that is the main obvious ones where you just gain so much time. And the speed you can roll through the corner, of course, as well. Just the cars are most of the time much more capable than people expect. Don't go out and brake now really late into every single corner. I don't recommend that. Yeah.
I see, like, you control oversteer so quickly, right? And just say like you're driving in the wet and some normal driver does that, they're spinning out, right? But you're doing it at like 150, 200 miles per hour. Just, I can already feel it, and it's boom, it's done. Like I said, it's natural.
Instinct. It's insane.
Yeah.
What's it like driving in the rain with these cars?
I really like driving in the rain. It was weird in go-karts. I hated it. I hated driving in the rain. You know, I wasn't that good in the rain. Didn't like it at all. I went to car racing, got some downforce, got more confident, and now it's my favorite condition because it's where the driver makes a lot more of difference than the car. And it's literally just about going out and basically just improving on what I just said, is finding the limits of the car as quickly as possible is what makes the difference. And obviously those limits then have drastically changed from the dry. And then it's like you've taken a good driver to a racing driver, and then you're separating out in racing drivers who can do it the quickest and the best, with finding the limits of the car, finding the limits of the track, the grip, because every track is different, with asphalt, rubber lines, stuff like that. Maybe some lines work better than others. And yeah, like the driver makes the difference in those conditions 99% of the time. And yeah, I love going out and having fun and just finding the limits and getting the car sideways and then being like, yep, that was the limit. That was quick. And enjoying it as well. Like it's a different experience with the rain. Much more enjoyable, I find, than just, you can be limited by the car and the dry, and then when it's rain, you know that you're the difference, and that just makes it so much more competitive and fun.
Maybe not necessarily in the rain, because I don't know. Yeah, but how much do simulators and stuff like that actually help you improve your driving?
Depends on the simulator.
Okay.
You know, a Formula One simulator can be upwards of 70 million euros, whereas a simulator in your house can be a couple hundred. The average one that drivers use are between, let's say, 8 and 15,000. So top end of what you could realistically have in your house.
Sure.
And they're good for a few things. They're good for, if you don't know a track, to just learn a track. They're really good now because people have made some insane track models with the perfect curbs, the perfect bumps, everything from advertising signage on the side, which, you know, seems like a small detail, and people might be like, oh, why is that in the game? It's just making it run slower. As a driver trying to learn the track, it's actually really useful, because if there's a sponsor boarding somewhere, that might be a reference for something that you hadn't thought of. And then if you go to the track and you're like, oh, I was braking at this sponsor boarding, I'm going to start to brake there and, you know, then work around it. It can be great. So for learning new tracks is just a really easy tool, just to get a sort of feel of, maybe you want to try different lines and see how the car flows on the simulator. It's a great way to start with that, just the very basic stuff. And also just to do like iRacing, racing against other people is always good, because you're just keeping your sort of race awareness up, thinking forward planning, stuff like that. And there are some very good people on iRacing who do know how to race. So it's a great way to just keep up that sort of mental race fitness. The cars themselves are not too accurate. Some of them are better than others. They're within sort of a 90% window, but you wouldn't do any proper like reference benchmarking on iRacing or R-Factor or anything like that. For that, you would need a 50 million euro simulator, which I don't have in my house. I don't know if you guys do.
I wish.
I guess obviously when you talk as well about like staying on and switched on all the time, like you've got people, even like, you know, like one of the best sim racing drivers in the world is Max Verstappen, which is a very odd thing to have happen as well. So there definitely obviously is, especially from what you said, advantages to having access to one or having a decent one. Maybe not lying around, maybe not like, you know, the ones that we have, like the millions of pounds ones, but yeah, maybe something a bit more entry level is a bit nicer to have. Yeah. I think Ash, you had another question around travel as well, didn't you?
Yeah, it was just you mentioned it earlier, like the constant travel. How do you acclimatize for different time zones? Actually, one question. Is the F2 car harder to drive than the F1 because of the lack of power steering?
So with that question, yes and no. Physically through the arms, the F2 car is way harder on arms and biceps and core even. It's much harder than F1 because of lack of power steering. So, you know, on high-speed tracks, the worst one was Jeddah for the weight through the wheel, just super high speed, the way the car is set up. The first time we went there, which was 2021, I think it was. Yeah, 2021. So all the teams were there. We had these ideas of what we wanted to do on the car from the simulator. So we put on a load of camber and caster to make the front wheels sort of a bit like this and create a very front-loaded car. And I think basically everyone went out, did the first practice session and could not turn the wheel just because it was so heavy and so high speed. That was the worst experience of it. Whereas Formula One has power steering. So there's no real weight through the wheel. That's personalizable for every driver. But in general, it's quite light through the wheel. But it's a lot harder on neck strength because of the higher G forces, the longer races and cardio as well. It's a lot more intense. With the higher G forces, you're breathing heavier. So from that side of it, it's much harder. So they're both hard, very hard in their own sort of perspectives. So yeah, that was that question. And for travel, for a long race, such as going to Melbourne, or Japan, Brazil, any of the big flyaways, a lot of the drivers, or all of the drivers in F1 have performance coaches, and part of their role will be to do a sleep schedule. So I've had it before where we flew to Australia to do Bathurst, and my performance coach, a month before the event, gave me a very simple PDF sleep schedule starting from about 10 days before the event, of which I just started going to bed and waking up half an hour or 1 hour increments before the event. So by the time the day I flew, I woke up at like 1 a.m. or something like that. But I was already on Australian time. So when we landed, no jet lag, perfectly onto the time zone.
Nice.
That's harder with F1, where they're going from somewhere like Las Vegas to Abu Dhabi, where back to back in one weekend, and the time difference is something stupid like 13 hours. It's a bit harder to do, but they will do something like that, where the Monday to the, they'll say, look, I know you're tired after the race, but you can't sleep. You've got to stay awake until a certain time just to try and help with the jet lag. So it'll be things like that. But the performance coach is the brains behind that, worrying about that, and they're just telling the driver, yeah, you're not allowed to sleep, or go free, have a nap in the middle of the day, sort of thing.
I think it brings it full circle back to the whole mental health thing, right? Like, glamorous, sounds good. Oh, they're on a private jet and all that, but like, I love my sleep, right? So if I'm super tired, they said if you had a long race, you're exhausted, it's like, yeah, you can't go to sleep. I would take the money, take the cars. As
a fan, I slept through most of the Japanese Grand Prix. I couldn't even watch it, let alone drive in it. Ridiculous. And then just to wrap up the podcast as well, so we're sort of nearing the end. Obviously, you mentioned the trip again. So for our listeners, we will be leaving a link somewhere, either in the podcast description and on our socials as well, to be sure to leave a donation. Ash and I will be doing a donation at some point in the next couple of hours or so. And yeah, really best of luck on your trip as well. A couple of questions just to wrap up the podcast. You said you're racing a lot, essentially with friends that you've made through years of racing. It must mean you have some particularly interesting contacts in your phone. Do you have anyone in particular, like how on earth have I managed to, get that bloke's number or anything like that? Is there anyone in particular where you're like, oh yeah, I have Vettel's number or something insane?
I think, like you say, because I've sort of grown up with a lot of the people, I've got quite a few F1 drivers in my contacts. There's not the thing where I I'm like, wow, how have I got this person's number? It's kind of because I know them, but
Yeah.
I'd say like the most famous like people is Oscar. I'm really good friends with Oscar Piastri.
Nice.
So him, Logan Sargent, Arthur Leclerc, Charles Leclerc. Let's say they're the big ones in my contact lists.
Yeah,
So
that's not
yeah.
bad. It's not bad.
Fair few Instagram followers between them.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Send them the odd meme here and there. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Just a random GIF or something like that.
It's like, Charles, please stop sending me these reels. Come on, there's only so much time in the day. Come on, lad.
Yeah, there's some funny WhatsApp chats, that's for sure.
I can imagine. Yeah. And then outside of racing, do your friends make you drive all the time?
That depends on who.
Okay.
Most of the time, I will try and drive because I don't like the way my friends drive.
Fair
And
enough.
they usually try and show off a bit, and I'm like, yeah, no, I'm gonna drive. If it's a racing driver, I don't really care. They can drive. Actually, I try and make them drive, so I'm not driving.
Fair enough,
So my teammate this year, Alex Lynn, I remember he was like, do you want to share a car for Barcelona? I was like, absolutely. Got there, gave him the keys, and I was like, you're driving.
Nice.
So yeah.
But I guess also it must be, are you a really good backseat driver, or are you somebody, are you almost like for example, like my girlfriend who's like, there's a car 3 miles away, please start braking now. Are you really bad, or are you actually not too bad?
I will do my best to not comment unless I think I'm in imminent danger of something.
I can feel the slip angle here. Right?
Yeah. Exactly.
And maybe just wrap up the final question. Best place you've been scuba diving?
Maldives. I went scuba diving in the Maldives. Awesome coral reefs.
Nice.
Loads of fish, loads of sharks. Yeah, awesome place to do that. Can recommend it.
Yeah, next time I'm in the Maldives, I'll
I'll just sell that simulator.
Yeah. Or like Stranded Deep on Steam. I'm sure that's a good game.
Work. Yeah, that's probably more in my budget, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
I spent all my money on my €50 million simulator. So
understandable.
Priorities, you know. But yeah, just to wrap things up, thank you again, honestly, for bothering to spend some time with us. I really, really appreciate it. And I know I've said it a couple of times, but absolutely best of luck on your ride. We will be keeping an eye out for little updates and stuff like that, and safe travels on your way to Monza.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for helping bring awareness to the trip and speaking to me about my racing career. It was great to be on, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Awesome.
Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers, everyone.